Hello, today we're going to be talking about two different things, absolute value expressions and absolute value equations. Absolute value expressions are going to look like what we see in front of you right now. We'll get to the equations in a little bit. And basically, absolute value expressions problems are going to be order of operations or PEMDAS problems. The only thing that's different than what we've done before, because we've done those right at the beginning of the year here, is that sometimes we see absolute value numbers within absolute value bars inside them. You've probably seen absolute value before, but just as a friendly reminder, anytime you take the absolute value of a number, you get a positive result. And that's because absolute value is how far away that number is away from zero. Distance is always a positive value. So, quick examples just to refresh our memories. If I take the absolute value of 5, I get 5, because 5 is 5 away from 0 on the number line. If I do the absolute value of -2, I get 2, because -2 is 2 away from 0 on the number line. So when we take absolute value, positive numbers stay positive, negative numbers become positive. So like I said, we're going to tackle these problems using our order of operations or PEMDAS. The only thing that's a little different since we have absolute value is that absolute value, any number that's inside an absolute value, we're going to take that first. And so basically absolute value is kind of like our parentheses step. If you have things to do, I'll do that in a different color because that marker is not happy. If you have things to do inside the absolute value bars, do those first, and then take the absolute value, whatever result you get. So let's just dive into some examples here. I have absolute value of -6 I need to take, absolute value of 3 I need to take. Those will be the first two things I do. I can do both of them in the same step. Absolute value of -6 is 6. 6 plus stays the same. Absolute value of 3 is 3. Now that we've taken care of all of our absolute value stuff, we're going to follow our order of operations. We do have parentheses things to do, so we'll do that next. 6 plus 3 gives me 9. I need to keep the parentheses around that 9 because this is showing that we need to multiply. Multiplication and division, remember, go together in the same step left to right. 6 times 9 gives me 54. Let's try another one. So the only absolute value I have in this problem is right here. So I'm going to keep everything else the same. Absolute value of -3 is +3. So that becomes a +3 at the end. Once I've taken the absolute value, I get rid of the bars. You probably noticed that back here too. Alrighty, so now I'm following our order of operations, parentheses stuff. I'm going to take care of all of my parentheses stuff in one step because it's just subtracting and adding. Kind of talk my way through it. -5 minus 1 is -6. I didn't mean to write that down, just kidding. So -5 minus 1 is -6, plus 3 is -3. I kept the parentheses around that -3. You didn't technically have to. The other way you could have written that step is -1 minus -3. So when you have minus and negative or double a negative, it's kind of like in English, a double negative makes a positive. So -1 minus -3 is really the same as -1 plus 3, no matter how you wrote it. So now let's just do our addition. -1 plus 3 gives me 2 for my final answer. So we're not going to spend a ton of time doing absolute value expressions. I just want to give you a little exposure to it. The other idea for today, which we will spend a little more time on in the next few days, are absolute value equations. They are what they sound like. They are equations that have absolute value in them. We're going to mostly solve them like we do regular equations. Let me get a couple written out and then I'll explain. And you may have noticed I write my absolute value bars really big. I do that just because of my own handwriting, otherwise they look too much like ones to me. Do whatever works for you. Alright, so we can tackle these a little bit differently than we would if, for instance, these were parentheses instead of absolute value bars. Your gut might be telling you to distribute right here. Do not listen to your gut. When we have absolute value bars, we're going to handle things a little bit differently. So I'm going to just use this first problem as an example and talk you through this. I have all this written out in the notes for you as well. When we have an absolute value equation, the very first thing you do is get rid of anything that's happening outside of the absolute value bars. So this 10 on the outside is 10 times my absolute value stuff. I need to undo times 10 by doing the opposite, which is dividing by 10. I'm going to divide by 10. Anything I do to one side of the equal sign, I got to do to the other. When I do that, that cancels the 10, which is what I wanted. I still have my absolute value stuff equals 35 divided by 10 is 3.5. By the way, you're going to run into some fractions and decimals for your problems. These problems sometimes will even have a fraction or decimal answer. Perfectly fine. Don't let that stress you out. Okay, so we got rid of our stuff outside the absolute value bars. The next step is once I have absolute value stuff all by itself on one side, number on the other, is I need to set this up into two equations. Whatever k is divided by 2 is 3.5 away from 0 on the number line. It can be 3.5 away from 0 in the positive direction, or it can be 3.5 away from 0 in the negative direction. So your next step for these is to split this into two equations. In both equations, just drop the absolute value stuff on the one side of the equation, to drop the absolute value bars, keep whatever was on the inside the same. And then number-wise, positive version of that number for one equation, negative version of that number for the other equation. To finish this off, we just need to solve what we're left with. I need to undo dividing by 2, so I'm going to multiply by 2. I get just k, which is what I want. 3.5 times 2 is 7. So one of my solutions is 7. Now I solve the other one. I need to multiply by 2. I get k equals negative 3.5 times 2 is negative 7. So when you have an absolute value equation, most of the time you're going to have two solutions. All the problems you're going to see today in this video and on your homework will have two solutions. There's some special cases where you don't get two solutions, but we'll talk about that another day. So retracing our steps, we got rid of the stuff outside the absolute value bars. Once the absolute value bars was by itself on one side of the equation, we split it into two equations, and then we solve them both. We get two answers, and that's perfectly fine. Let's try another one. So getting rid of things outside of the bars, I have a minus 2 outside of the bars. To undo minus 2, I add 2. So I get my absolute value stuff equals 4. Now, I need to, since I have absolute value stuff all by itself on one side, split it into two equations like I did back here. So first equation is going to look exactly like this, just without the absolute value bars. The second equation, I'm going to turn that into a negative 4. Before we solve, I want to talk about one quick thing. A lot of times people are like, hey, Miss Avers, that was a negative 8 inside the absolute value bars. How come you didn't make that a positive 8? I can only evaluate or take the absolute value of something if I know what everything inside there is. Since I don't know what value k is, I can't take the absolute value of that side. Instead, to kind of tackle that, that's why we split into two equations. So we didn't forget anything there, don't worry. All right, to finish solving this out, we want to get k by itself. I undo minus 8 by adding 8. First solution is going to be k equals 12. Same stuff over here, just happening to a different number. Negative 4 plus 8 is positive 4. So once again, two solutions like we would expect. I'd like to do two more with you, and then I'll quit bugging you for now. Give me a moment to reset my board here. Okay, so two more, and we'll be done with these for today. Once again, we want to get rid of anything that's outside of the bars first. I have 10 plus absolute value stuff. To undo adding 10 to something, I subtract 10 from both sides. I'm left with absolute value stuff equals 11. Now I split into two equations. First one looks exactly like this, just without the absolute value bars. For the second one, just turn that into a negative 11. Now we solve them both. So it's subtracting 5. 11 minus 5 is 6. And then last but not least, one of my solutions is going to be negative 2 when I divide. Now I got to do the other one. It's going to be the same steps, so subtract 5. Negative 11 minus 5 is negative 16. And then here, you can write your answer two different ways. I'm not going to be very picky. You can pick whatever way makes sense to you. You can leave your answer as a fraction. If you leave your answer as a fraction, I'd like you to reduce it. 16 divided by 3 can't reduce, but negative divided by negative reduces to a positive. So you can just write your answer as 16 over 3. That's the way I usually do things. If you would like to write it as a decimal instead, do negative 16 divided by negative 3 in your calculator, and that is going to give you 5.3 repeating, or 5.33 if you want to round to two places. Again, I'm not going to be picky as long as you have the right answer. I don't care if it's in fraction form or decimal form. One last one. So everything over here in the absolute value bars is getting divided by 5. To undo divided by 5, I multiply by 5. So I get absolute value stuff. Make my bars a little bigger here. 1 times 5 is 5. Now I need to make that into two equations. Remember, for the second equation, just make that a negative 5. And now we solve them both. So first thing we do is going to undo plus 4 by subtracting 4. 5 minus 4 is 1. Last step, I need to undo 7 times a, so I divide by 7. I get a equals 1 over 7. If you'd rather do 1 over 7 in decimal form, not a big deal. Now we're going to do the same stuff but to the other equation. So minus 4, excuse me. Negative 5 minus 4 is negative 9. Divide. That fraction doesn't reduce, so a just equals negative 9 over 7. So that is it for absolute value expressions and equations. Let me know if you have any questions. Have a fantastic day.